Thank you, Anne. That was a lovely introduction. And now I don't have to synopsize the plot for everybody. I can't tell you how pleased I was when Heather Palmer called to tell me about this award. I mean, anybody would be, right? But maybe even a little more for a writer who was born and bred in Detroit, Michigan, just a lake away from Chicago, where Jane Addams lived. And somebody who actually read Jane Addams' Little Lame Girl from the Orange Biography series, because there were very few girl or women-oriented biographies in the library when I was a kid. And somebody who got her MFA in a social worky aspect of psychology. But truthfully, that's not why I ended up writing The First Step. Frankly, after decades of living in Boston, which became my adopted home, I couldn't stand going on the Freedom Trail one more time with visitors. And so the next time somebody came, I suggested something new. And I had just heard about the Black Heritage Freedom Trail, which is a walking tour in downtown Boston and Beacon Hill that talks about the history of 19th century Americans. And the moment that the park ranger mentioned Sarah C. Roberts v. City of Boston, I knew I was going to write this story. I'd lived in Boston for decades, and it was the first time that I had ever heard of this. And in fact, when I talked to people, other people had not heard this story, and I was pretty incredulous. Why hadn't this story been told? It's such a significant case. Now I won't explain it because we know what it is. That's great. I was going to be long anyway. But so I actually when I got down to writing it, I have to say, even though I've been a nonfiction author my whole life and written dozens of books, writing The First Step was a first step for me. I had never really tried to bring a historical child to life before, and certainly not a girl about whom, despite copious and endless and sincere research, the only thing that I knew about her really was her birth date and her home address. So how do you bring something like that alive for kids? Luckily, I did have a lot of knowledge, or some knowledge, about the second character in my book, and that's social justice and the zigzagging nature of social change. Sometimes when writing a book and I get stuck because I'm trying to explain something a little bit difficult to kids. And so I try to simplify it, and maybe it's still not going to be clear, and I try again and again, stripping it down to its core. And if I'm lucky, in that process, I find a new way to understand something I thought I knew. So imagine writing a timeline of the history of integration for your back matter. My editor is here, and she'll know that each one has to be just a second long, one sentence long, because there's no more room on the 48 pages. And you do this, and you strip these amazing events, assassinations, revolts, demonstrations, victories, decisions in court, down. And as you read them, one line at a time, you see them all very starkly. And what happened to me is I realized that I was looking at all the incremental steps made by people on both sides, each side fighting for what they thought was right. And one side makes enough gains so that the other one starts to mobilize and fight back. And it just becomes this tug of war and this war of tugs where each side is trying to get what they believe in. And this happens again and again and again. So what did I learn? Something I think we all know a little better now than perhaps we knew even a few years ago. No victory is final and can be taken for granted. The causes and the values that we hold dear need to be nurtured and supported and taught to our children again and again and again. So I'm so happy that the incomparable E.B. Lewis and I banded together to get this message across. Thank you.